I always thought betrayal would be loud, shouting, slam doors, chaos. But when it came for me, it was quiet, almost like a business transaction. You're just a bastard. The words cut through the soft clinking of silverware, slicing into the warm, butter-scented air of the Carter family's Thanksgiving dinner. I sat at the far end of the long, polished table, the flickering candles casting shadows on the faces I'd once memorized, now all averted, cold, unreadable. Elaine's smile didn't reach her eyes. She passed the gravy boat as if we were discussing the weather, not my worth as a daughter. Richard, sitting like a judge at the head of the table, barely glanced up from his plate. Caleb leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking, while Brianna dabbed at her lipstick, her fork clinking deliberately against her wineglass. I watched them, the people I had spent my whole life trying to please, moving in slow, deliberate movements, a family tableau that no longer had space for me. The family portrait above the fireplace loomed in my vision, each face perfectly posed, smiling, pristine. There was always one spot, just a little too small, a little too temporary, where I sat. It had never quite felt like mine. The dinner began as they always did. Small talk, compliments on the meal, murmurs of gratitude for another year. But beneath it all, a tension simmered, crackling like static. Caleb's gaze lingered on me too long, sharp and predatory, before he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "She's not one of us," he said casually, as if commenting on the weather. "Not really." The air seemed to collapse around me. My pulse thudded in my ears, drowning out the clink of glasses, the scrape of chairs. Elaine's voice slid in like a blade dipped in honey. "It's time you leave, Sienna. You're not part of this legacy." I blinked. The words felt like ice water, sharp, shocking, but inescapable. My fork clattered onto my plate, the sound startlingly loud. I searched their faces for something, recognition, love, even pity, but found only cold indifference. Richard's voice cut through the silence, final and absolute. "You're out of the will." The world tilted. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt the heat of humiliation rise, but I didn't let it spill. Not here. Not in front of them. My hands trembled under the table, fingers curling into the napkin on my lap. The china gleamed under the chandelier's soft glow. The turkey sat carved on the platter, its golden skin untouched by my appetite. I looked at Caleb, at the smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, at Elaine's perfectly arranged silver hair, at Richard's unflinching stare, and then at Brianna, whose gaze flickered away too quickly, as if she had already rehearsed this scene in her mind 1,000 times. I pushed my chair back slowly, the scrape of the legs echoing in the heavy silence. My legs felt stiff, my heart pounding, but I moved with purpose. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. As I walked toward the front door, Richard's voice followed me, a command etched into my bones. "Don't come back." I reached for the doorknob, the brass cold against my fingers, and stepped out into the chill of the Arizona night. The desert air bit into my skin, sharp and unforgiving, but it felt cleaner than the stifling poison inside that house. The crunch of gravel under my boots was the only sound as I crossed the driveway. My car sat in the shadows, a silent witness to my exile. I didn't cry. Not yet. And then, as I passed the porch, my eyes caught something. A glint of silver, the soft rustle of leather. Brianna's purse sat half open on the bench, a corner of a sealed envelope sticking out. My name was written on it, in her neat, looping script. My breath caught. My feet stopped. For a moment, the cold, sharp air didn't seem so clean anymore. Some nights, the silence feels louder than any scream. And that night, silence was all I had. The hum of the motel's ancient air conditioner buzzed like a wasp trapped in the walls, an endless drone that filled the space with static instead of comfort. I lay there on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling's water stains that spread like ink blots in the dim light. The same ceiling that had watched me crumble, hour by hour, Breath by Shallow Breath. Every time I closed my eyes, the dinner replayed in my head like a bad movie on a loop. Caleb's smug voice, Elaine's clipped finality, Richard's cold decree. Their faces blurred, but the words were sharp enough to keep cutting. I thought about how Caleb had always been the golden boy, the one who could never do wrong. I thought about the times I sat quietly in the corner while my achievements were brushed aside, dismissed as good enough for her. I thought about how they clapped for him and smiled for Brianna, and how they had never once, not even by accident, called me extraordinary. The motel smelled like bleach and stale coffee. My clothes were folded neatly on the single chair, the same way I always did, as if some small order might anchor me to reality. The envelope lay on the nightstand, daring me to open it. I reached for it with a hand that barely felt like mine. The paper felt heavier than it should. My name, written in Brianna's smooth script, stared back at me. I unfolded the flap slowly, careful not to tear the paper. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, ivory with an embossed border. No signature, no heading, just a sentence scrawled in tight handwriting. You were never supposed to know, but you were born in February, not March. I read it twice. Then again. February, not March? The weight of the sentence pressed into my chest, tightening around my lungs like a vice. I flipped the paper over, looking for more, for a clue, for anything. But the back was blank. I sat in the silence, the motel's buzz filling my ears, the world suddenly tilting on its axis. My birthday, my identity, my very place in the family. It was like someone had whispered a secret that shattered everything I thought I knew. The phone on the nightstand vibrated sharply against the wood, breaking the stillness. I stared at it for a beat too long before picking it up. Noah's name glowed on the screen. I have something you need. His voice was soft, like it always had been. Steady, certain, no room for doubt. I didn't respond right away. My fingers hovered over the phone, the weight of the envelope heavy in my lap. My mouth tasted of metal, and I realized I had been holding my breath. The motel's clock ticked too loud in the stillness. I thought about saying no, about throwing the envelope into the trash and pretending this night had never happened, about pretending I hadn't heard the words, "You're just a bastard," echo in my head every time I blinked. But I couldn't. Desperation has a way of making cowards out of you. And survivors, too. I typed back, my fingers moving without my permission. When? Now. The diner on 89, I swallowed hard, my throat raw like I'd been screaming into a void no one could hear. I stood, grabbing my coat and the envelope, my hands trembling as I locked the motel door behind me. The night air slapped me awake, cold and dry, the stars sharp like shards of glass scattered across the Arizona sky. The diner sat on the corner of a half-lit street, the neon sign buzzing in uneven flickers, casting the parking lot in a pale pink glow. My boots crunched on the gravel as I crossed the lot, each step louder than the last in the quiet. Noah was already there, sitting in a corner booth. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes steady, dark under the flickering fluorescent light. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just a nod, like he'd been expecting me all along. I hesitated at the threshold, my pulse a wild drumbeat in my ears. Noah slid a file across the table, his fingers resting lightly on the edge for a fraction of a second, like he was reluctant to let it go. My name was printed on the tab. I didn't sit down. My feet felt like they had sunk into the floor. My breath came shallow, my heart racing so loud I could barely hear the quiet clatter of plates in the background. The envelope in my coat pocket felt like a burning coal against my ribs. The file sat between us like a bomb, waiting to detonate. The truth doesn't whisper. It punches, claws, and burns. And now it's in my hands. The file sat on the diner table, thick and heavy like a loaded weapon. My fingertips hovered over it, the corners of the folder digging into the worn Formica surface. I felt the weight of it, like it could shatter the floor beneath my feet if I let it go. The clatter of forks and muted hum of the jukebox barely registered in my ears. The world had narrowed to this moment. This man. and the file that could undo everything I thought I knew. Noah's eyes watched me steadily, his hands folded in front of him as if he was waiting for me to breathe. There was no rush in him, no urgency, just a quiet, patient presence, like he'd been waiting for this moment longer than I had. I forced my fingers to move, to open the folder, and when I did, the contents felt like they exploded in my chest. A DNA report. My name in bold at the top, Isabel Carter listed as mother, Richard Carter as father. Negative. A second document, notarized, stamped with the seal of the state, marked with the date from years ago. Isabel's last will, a supplemental clause in her handwriting. Sienna is my legal heir. No one else has a claim. My breath hitched, my pulse slamming so hard it felt like it would crack my ribs. I looked up at Noah, wide-eyed, as if he could explain this to me, make it make sense. His voice was low, even, like he was delivering a weather report instead of rewriting my life. Isabel left it with me. She trusted I'd give it to you when the time was right. I couldn't move, couldn't blink. My hands shook as I lifted the flash drive that tumbled out from the folder's pocket. I stared at it like it might bite me, like it held something radioactive. Play it, Noah said gently, his voice barely above a whisper. The diner's lights buzzed overhead, casting a dull yellow glow across the table. I slid the drive into my laptop, hands trembling so badly I almost dropped it. The speakers crackled and then her voice filled the space. My mother's voice, softer than I remembered, but clear, resolute. Sienna, if you're hearing this, it means they've tried to erase you. You are my daughter, my blood. They'll tell you otherwise. They'll make you believe you're a mistake, that you don't belong. Don't believe them. You are mine. The tears that welled in my eyes didn't fall. They just sat there, hot and burning, as I listened to her words over and over again. The woman who had held me in her arms, who had stroked my hair and whispered lullabies, who had, in her final years, grown distant, cold. She hadn't abandoned me. She had protected me the only way she knew how. The rage that had simmered in my veins for days ignited, sharpening into a single, focused flame. They had lied to me. All of them. My father, my siblings, Elaine. Every sneer, every dismissive glance, every cold shoulder had been built on a lie. I closed the laptop slowly, the sound of the click loud in the quiet air. My eyes locked on Noah's, and something shifted between us. An unspoken agreement, a shared understanding of what came next. They took everything from me, I said, my voice steady now, low and dangerous. Let's see how they handle the truth. Noah's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. I'll stand by you. The air in the diner felt electric, charged with something I couldn't name. The weight of what I'd just learned didn't crush me. It forged me into something sharper, harder, more dangerous. I opened my email on my phone, the glow of the screen illuminating my face in the dim light. My fingers flew over the keys, typing faster than my brain could keep up. The words spilled out in a single breath. I will be attending the will reading, and I have something to add. I hit send before I could think twice. The message hung in the air like a loaded gun, aimed at the heart of my family. Many years passed where they spoke over me. Now, they have no choice but to listen. The warmth of the Carter estate that night was a lie. A facade wrapped in tinsel and soft carols playing from hidden speakers. The Christmas tree stood towering in the corner, dripping with ornaments like medals on a general's chest, and the scent of pine and cinnamon twisted in the air like a taunt. Every face in the room was turned toward the lawyer, every mouth wearing polite, expectant smiles. Until I walked in. The air shifted the moment I stepped into the grand hall, my boots clicking against the gleaming hardwood. The fire in the hearth cracked, casting flickering shadows across the faces of the family I had once tried so hard to belong to. Elaine sat near the fireplace, her posture rigid but her fingers fluttering nervously over the hem of her skirt. Richard loomed in his chair like a statue carved from cold stone. Caleb stood near the drinks cart, glass in hand, his jaw tight, his knuckles whitening. Brianna sat by the window, her eyes darting like a trapped bird, lips pressed so tightly together they'd gone pale. Noah was there, off to the side. Steady, silent, like a lighthouse watching the storm roll in. I could feel the weight of Isabel's words pressing into my ribs, as if she was standing behind me, whispering into my ear. "They'll try to erase you, but you are mine." The lawyer, a sharp man in a tailored suit with an air of practiced detachment, cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" "Not yet," I said, my voice slicing through the polite murmur like a blade. "Before we proceed, I have documents that must be acknowledged." A ripple moved through the room. Disbelief, then a rising murmur of protest. Elaine's voice, sharp and panicked, cut through. "This is not the time." "It is," I interrupted, and handed the file to the lawyer. The crackle of the fireplace seemed to quiet as he flipped it open, eyebrows lifting as he scanned the contents. The DNA results, notarized affidavits, the sealed letter from Isabel. He reached for the flash drive without a word and slid it into his laptop. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then, my mother's voice, clear and calm, filled the space like a hymn in a cathedral. "Sienna is my daughter. My blood. My legacy. They'll tell you otherwise. Don't believe them." Elaine's hands twitched in her lap, her lips a thin line of fury barely held together. Richard's face darkened, as if every ounce of control he clung to was slipping through his fingers. Caleb's drink sloshed over the rim, his fist shaking. Brianna's breath hitched audibly, and she folded in on herself like a flower under frost. I stood, unmoving, feeling their eyes burn into me. My voice came out steady, cold, measured. "I'm not a mistake. I'm the rightful heir, and today I'm reclaiming what's mine." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The lawyer cleared his throat again, voice carefully neutral but tinged with something close to intrigue. "We'll pause the reading to review this new evidence," he announced. The room erupted, not with noise but with a different kind of chaos. Elaine's veneer cracked. She stood, her voice rising in protest, but the lawyer was already moving, gathering documents, eyes sharp behind his glasses. Richard looked like a man who had been gutted but refused to show it. Caleb's voice rose in angry bursts, accusations, insults. But they fell flat, powerless against the weight of the facts. I stood in the eye of the storm, unshaken, watching as the world I had once been shut out of began to crumble in slow, deliberate pieces. This wasn't just my moment. It was the reckoning they never saw coming. Lies collapse quickly when the truth smacks you in the face. The air inside the Carter estate felt like it had turned to glass. Thin, brittle, ready to shatter at the lightest touch. I stood in the center of the chaos, the folder of documents in my hands like a weapon I hadn't known I'd been carrying all my life. The lawyer's voice cut through the rising tension, crisp and deliberate. "Based on the DNA evidence, the will, and supporting documentation, I can confirm that Sienna Carter is the legal heir. The documents have been verified." Elaine let out a strangled sound, her composure crumbling as she tried to stand, her fingers gripping the back of the nearest chair like it might save her from drowning. "This can't be. This isn't—" But the words died in her throat as I turned, slow and measured, and laid the rest of the evidence on the table. "Here," I said, my voice cold but even. "Emails, financial records, years of hidden documents, proof that you knew, proof that you lied, proof that you built this family's legacy on erasure." The sound of papers sliding across the table felt louder than the carols still piping faintly through the speakers. Caleb lunged forward, his voice a snarl. "You think this makes you one of us? You're just a bastard who lucked into a few signatures." I turned, met his eyes, and didn't flinch. I'm a Carter, the only one with the guts to stand in the open. He slammed his fist on the table, rattling the crystal glassware, but the lawyer's voice rang out sharp and clear. "Enough." Outside, the sound of chaos grew louder. Voices, shouts, the unmistakable click and flash of cameras. The reporters had arrived, their lenses aimed like weapons, hungry for the spectacle unfolding behind the Carter estate's grand iron gates. Brianna sat hunched in her chair, tears streaking the perfect lines of her makeup. Her voice, small and broken, drifted across the table. I didn't know. I swear I didn't. Elaine's voice cracked as she sank into the chair, her hands trembling as she gripped the armrest like a lifeline. This isn't how it was supposed to end, she whispered, eyes unfocused, staring at something that wasn't there. Richard. Richard said nothing. The man who had held the family together by sheer force of will sat stiff, shoulders squared, but his eyes were empty, a hollowed-out ruin. I turned toward the door, the noise from outside surging as reporters broke through the gates, their voices rising in a cacophony of questions. I could see the flashes from the cameras through the tall windows, catching the edges of the chaos inside. I stepped out onto the front steps, the cold December air biting at my skin. The cameras clicked like gunfire, the voices overlapping. Ms. Carter, are you the rightful heir? Did they really disown you? How does it feel to take back what's yours? I let the questions wash over me like a wave. I didn't smile. I didn't hide. I stood tall, my breath steady, my pulse loud in my ears, but my voice clear when I spoke. I'm not just a bastard. I'm the Carter who built a name of my own, and I will make sure they remember that. The reporters surged forward, the questions tumbling over each other in a frenzy. Then, as the noise swelled, the lawyer approached quietly from behind, his voice low but cutting through the din like a blade. Sienna, there's something else. I turned, the heat of the spotlight still on my skin, and met his gaze. He held out an envelope, simple, unassuming, my name written in Isabel's familiar looping hand. A letter, and a key. The words hung in the cold air, waiting. They tried to erase me. Now I'm writing the next chapter under my own name. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of my new office, painting the walls in soft gold. The space wasn't much. 2 rooms, a shared desk, and a coffee machine that coughed before it brewed. But it was mine. On the wall behind me, a fresh brass plaque gleamed. The Isabel Carter Foundation for Women in STEM. I ran my fingers over the engraved letters, feeling the weight of it settle in my chest like a steady heartbeat. Noah stood by the window, hands in his pockets, watching the city stir to life below. The streets buzzed faintly, a low hum of possibility. We'd barely spoken this morning, but the silence wasn't heavy. It was filled with quiet understanding, a sense that the storm had passed and the rebuilding had begun. The letter from Isabel sat on my desk, edges worn from where I'd read it over and over again. Her words lingered in my mind, sharp and soft all at once. Build something they can't take from you. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even forgiveness, but it was a blessing in her way. I picked up the key, cool and solid in my palm, and unlocked the small safe Noah had helped me find in the bank vault 2 days before. The lock clicked open with a satisfying snap, and inside, nestled in a velvet pouch, was a single photograph. It showed me as a child, grinning, gap-toothed, arms wrapped around a woman whose face was mostly obscured by a large sun hat. The handwriting on the back made my breath catch. Find her. She knows the rest. The rest? My stomach twisted, but I folded the photo carefully, tucking it back into the envelope as if it were made of glass. A mystery for another time. Today, I had a different mission. I straightened my blazer and stepped into the small conference room where the first workshop for the foundation was already in session. A handful of young women sat at the long table, some nervous, some excited, all of them looking at me with eyes full of hope. Thank you for being here, I said, my voice steady but warm. You are the future I'm fighting for. And this is just the beginning. One of the girls, maybe 19, raised her hand, her voice hesitant. How did you start over? After everything? I smiled, not the practiced, brittle smile I'd worn for years, but something softer, real. You don't start over, I said. You start. Period. You take the pieces of the life they tried to destroy, and you build something they can't touch. Noah's gaze met mine from across the room. He didn't speak, but his nod felt like an anchor. The press event was small. Just a few local journalists, cameras flashing politely, microphones held out with quiet curiosity. I spoke to them briefly, thanking them for their interest, then finished with a single line that felt like a promise to myself as much as it was to them. This is only the beginning. Later, as the sun dipped low and the room emptied, I stood by the window, watching the city lights blink to life one by one. The hum of the world felt different now. Less like a threat, more like a promise. Noah came up beside me, his presence a quiet warmth. I didn't lean on him. I didn't need to. But I didn't move away either. I pulled the photo from my pocket, holding it up to the fading light. "Find her," the note said. My fingers traced the letters, the woman's blurred face, the sun hat tilted just so. I had won the battle, but the war wasn't over yet. And I wasn't afraid to fight for the truth. The Carter family's carefully constructed facade crumbled under the weight of undeniable truth, leaving behind shards of shattered pride and whispered regrets. Sienna's courage had not only reclaimed what was rightfully hers, but also lit a fire that could never be extinguished, one built on the lessons of betrayal, resilience, and fierce determination. When injustice is met with unwavering resolve, the final reckoning may take time, but its echoes are impossible to silence. In the end, they tried to erase her, but Sienna's story became too bold, too relentless, and too true to ever be forgotten.